This is the OnePlus 15, and value per dollar, it definitely punches above its weight class, but it does come with some trade-offs. While you get a huge battery, amazing display, and fantastic performance, OnePlus has sort of shifted their identity with this phone. The rounded edges and circular camera bump from previous models are gone in favor of something more minimal. The camera system itself is quite different, and there are a few sacrifices that have been made to get the OnePlus 15 to where it is now. I've been testing it out for the last 4 weeks or so to try and find out what that actually means for real-world use, and explore some of the features that are specific to OnePlus that you don't find anywhere else, and it's honestly been a bit of a mixed bag. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. Probably my favorite Android phone out of any released this year was the OnePlus 13 for a couple of reasons. I absolutely love the design and the color on this particular model. The battery life is amazing, and it's just an all-around great device. And it held up really well compared to the models that came after it. So my expectations for the OnePlus 15 were set pretty high. Unboxing it, the first thing that I noticed was how much of a departure it is from the 13 visually. The design language is completely different this generation, with a square camera bump, straight edges, and a matte finish with 3 color options: black, purple, and the one that I have here, which is Sandstorm. You'll see that there is really no shimmer to this at all, and that has a lot to do with the material, where the OnePlus 15 has what's called a micro-arc oxidation finish. Basically, it's a ceramic coating over the aluminum frame that's supposed to be more durable than aluminum or titanium, but in person, it does almost look and feel like polished stone. In regards to the look itself, from my understanding, OnePlus wanted to go with something more minimal or elegant with the 15, but I am a bit disappointed with it, if I'm being completely honest. Their old design language really stood out to me, and I think you could have used that as a base and brought in these materials and a minimalistic take to that, versus something that looks a tad more generic. They also ditched the alert slider on the side for what they're calling the plus key, which is basically the same thing as the action button on an iPhone, and it just feels like they've lost some character this generation. That being said, it is about the same weight as last gen at 211 grams, and it is quite comfortable to use. I often find myself naturally resting my finger on the camera bump, so there's not as much pressure on my pinky finger. And thankfully I haven't dropped it at all, and it doesn't have any marks or scratches. The 15 also has fantastic water and dust resistance with IP68 and IP69K ratings. That means that this can withstand water from high pressure jets and be submerged for a half hour, and on the front display you get decent protection with Gorilla Glass Victus 2, along with super slim bezels at only 1.15 millimeters. This display kind of follows that same pattern, where you get some really great features, but you also make some sacrifices, although I'm not sure that you'll notice the trade-offs much at all. That has a 6.8-inch LTPO AMOLED panel with a refresh rate of 165 Hz, which I believe is the highest refresh rate you can get in a phone like this. But in order to do that, OnePlus had to drop the resolution down from 1440 by 3168 in the 13 to 1272 by 2772 in the 15. That drops the pixel density down to 450 from 510 pixels per inch, and like I said, I doubt many people are gonna notice that change. It's still incredibly sharp, and it's probably the smoothest display that I've ever used, as not only do you have the high refresh rate, but the peak touch sample rate goes up to 3200 Hz, which is about double that of most flagships. That means the OnePlus 15 picks up movement much faster than other phones and is ideal for gaming, which I'll get into in a bit, but it also gets incredibly bright at up to 1800 nits peak brightness in high brightness mode, so easily viewable outdoors, and conversely, it can go all the way down to 1 nit for usage at night as well. My only complaint there is sometimes the auto brightness struggles in dimly lit rooms and it tries to dial it back too much where it's hard to see, and I'll have to manually adjust it, but that's my only criticism, and this looks fantastic, whether it's for general usage, playing games, watching content, or doing color critical work like editing photos, and a big part of that is because of the OS that's powering everything. The OnePlus 15 runs Android 16 with OxygenOS 16, and OnePlus has done a bunch of custom work within OxygenOS to make everything as fluid and seamless as possible. They have what they call Parallel Processing 2.0, which essentially enhances rendering with animation, so everything is super fluid with no stuttering, and they built their own CPU scheduler to more efficiently manage resource allocation, specifically with the chipset in here. That is the new Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5, where this particular model has 16 gigs of RAM and a 512 gig SSD. And performance on here is great, with around 25% better performance in CPU benchmarks over the OnePlus 13, and about 13% better GPU scores. Also, I did come across some performance modes under the battery settings where going from balanced to high performance seems to have a little to no effect here, but one thing I noticed while testing is the OnePlus 15 runs much hotter than the 13, going upwards of 53 degrees Celsius, which is surprising given that there's a new cooling system with a bigger vapor chamber this gen. Now, translating that into real-world use, you're obviously not going to notice that with everyday things like scrolling social media or navigating through apps, or even with most creative apps, but in games, when you combine it with a better screen, it feels very responsive and smooth, although it does warm up a touch. Games like Call of Duty, Real Racing 3, and Delta Force play amazingly well, as do super resource-heavy titles like Wuthering Waves, and if you're really into mobile gaming on Android, I would be somewhat concerned with heat, but if you're not, this stays relatively cool, and it's nice to know that you don't have to worry about this getting sluggish or slow for many years. Bringing things back around to OxygenOS 16, the interface has clean, rounded elements like the past version where it seems to lean into the iOS look, which people will likely either love or hate. It does have its own dynamic island. The swiping down from the screen brings up the shelf that is similar to Spotlight on iOS, and like I mentioned earlier, the new plus key is similar to the action button. By default, that's hooked up to what they call Plus Mind, where when you click it, it'll analyze and save the content on your screen to the Mindspace app. Or you can hold down on that key to record audio where it does the same thing. If you have a Nothing phone, this feels a lot like how the Essential key and space work, where this is basically an organized hub of all that info. Plus Mind, or Mindspace, is supposed to hook into Gemini, where Gemini can use it to pull info out of. I didn't have any luck getting it to work myself, but it is smart enough to recognize dates and screenshots and add them to your calendar, which is kinda useful. Gemini is still the default assistant on here like most Android phones these days, and similarly, you do have all these other OnePlus AI features, like AI Writer, Recorder, Voice Notes, Portrait Glow, and AI Perfect Shot, which I've personally never used outside of testing. I did find the AI Writer to be somewhat annoying, where anytime you write a post for social media, it's always hanging out over top your keyboard, and I'm not writing posts with AI, so I just disabled that. But I would say the most useful tools within here aren't AI based at all, but are related to multitasking and quality of life, like Open Canvas, where I can split screen apps easily, and O+ Connect. And to get that to work, I do need to download it on my Mac, but once I have it and set it up, I can seamlessly copy and paste between my Mac and my phone, easily manage all the files on my phone from my Mac, and I can even mirror my phone to my computer, which is super handy. This makes me miss the ecosystem features I get with my iPhone a lot less, and it's something that I use every day. I've transferred a lot of photos and videos to my Mac, which I have taken quite a few of, and it's incredibly convenient. Speaking of the cameras, that's another area that I would say could be perceived as a downgrade, but I don't necessarily think that's true. On paper, the camera system is actually worse than the OnePlus 13. All three lenses are 50 megapixels, which hasn't changed, but all three sensors on the 15 are smaller, two of which are also slower, with the main lens being f1.8 instead of 1.6 in the 13. The telephoto is f2.8, where last gen was 2.6, and the ultra-wide stays the same at f2.0. That should theoretically make the photos and videos worse on here, especially since OnePlus dropped their partnership with Hasselblad in favor of their own Detail Max engine. So it does drop some features that some folks love, like X-Pan, but the photos coming off of here are pretty decent. The colors are much more natural and true to life than the Hasselblad ones, although, like the design, you do lose some of that character or originality, which I actually prefer, but regardless, everything is nice and crisp without feeling over-sharpened. The macro mode works decent, HDR highlights and shadows never feel like they're overly aggressive, and photos hold up fairly well compared to other flagships. I do notice sometimes it doesn't boost up the shadows as much as I'd like, where occasionally I'll get too dark of an image in daylight versus what I see personally, but night photos are well exposed, and even though the aperture isn't as wide here, there's very little grain or softness, which is impressive. On the video side of things, standard video looks okay. It can tend to struggle in dimly lit scenes, but it's alright for casual usage. You can go up to 4K at 120 frames per second here, but I do find you see a pretty clear drop in quality shooting at 120 FPS. Things are just a lot softer and more compressed, where 60 FPS and below has a much nicer image. You will also notice a bit of color shift at times cycling between lenses, but I will say that moving between lenses feels smoother than on a lot of phones. And the most exciting thing about this phone personally is the introduction of a pro video mode, where I can shoot in log with more frame rate options, I can add a real-time LUT if I want to, and I've got more control over the image. Shooting in log produces a more natural image that doesn't have a lot of sharpening on it, and it's easy to pull into Final Cut Pro and grade afterwards, but you can shoot HDR in Dolby Vision all the way up to 4K 120, so super versatile in that sense. In regards to the front camera, that has the exact same specs as the 13, but is actually a different sensor that's supposed to be better with selfies in low light. I honestly rarely ever use that camera outside of calls or meetings, which this does work great for, and with any communication or wireless connectivity, this phone has been solid as well, with one exception. For starters, the OnePlus 15 has a dedicated Wi-Fi chip that I found has a tad better range than the OnePlus 13. That has Wi-Fi 7 with fantastic speed, and the 15 also has Bluetooth 6, but I have had some issues wirelessly, specifically with Android Auto. First of all, I'm not going to say that this is for certain the fault of the phone, because it could very well be my vehicle. But this is the first phone that I've had that has had constant connection issues here, where if I'm using Google Maps, it'll often disconnect and completely restart, but it's really unpredictable as to when it happens. It's just really inconvenient though, and it's just a bit strange because I've used this with the Samsung S25 Ultra, the Pixel 10 Pro, and a few other phones. And this has been the only phone it happens with. I did ask a couple other people who have been using this phone and they've had no problems, but I thought it was worth mentioning, and I did have one time where this was freaking out trying to connect to an accessory, and it would not stop until I turned Bluetooth completely off, but for the most part, it's worked completely fine with everything else. I've used this quite a bit with my Nothing headphones and never had an issue, and I honestly wouldn't be overly concerned with it. And the minor pain points that I've had there have definitely been made up with arguably the best part about this phone, the battery. The OnePlus 15 has a whopping 7,300 mAh silicon carbon battery, up from 6,000 last year, which was already pretty big, and the battery life on here has been outstanding. I can get up to 2 full days of regular usage on this thing without charging it, and even when you really crank things up with super resource-heavy use cases, this still lasts a full day, which is super impressive. There have been nights where I've forgotten to charge it, and it'll often be at 60 or 70% the next day, depending on how much I used it the day before. And the nice thing is, even when you have a low battery, this can charge up to 100 watts, or 80 watts with the provided charger that comes with it in the box, and that'll give you a 0 to 100% charge in less than an hour. And you can't ask for much more than that. The only thing that I would personally like to see on these chargers is for OnePlus to ditch the USB-A port on them. It's a really minor thing, but it does make it feel a bit dated. If wired charging isn't your thing, a OnePlus wireless charger can give you up to 50 watts of power, which, again, is very high for a wireless charger, but from what I can tell, this does not support Qi 2. It has no built-in magnets, which is a slight bummer, but I would say that this is one of the best phones out there when it comes to overall battery performance and charging. OnePlus also says the OnePlus 15 is engineered to retain 80% battery health after 4 years of use, and I would say the battery in here will likely outlive the phone itself in terms of usability, where software updates will match that at 4 years of OS updates with 6 years of security patches. So, not the highest out there, but I think the person that this is targeting is probably someone who's upgrading their phone a lot more frequently than that. In any case, I would say that this is a device of trade-offs in multiple different areas. The design for me is a step back as it's less unique and loses a bit of character, but it's also more durable. The display sacrifices a little on resolution for a higher refresh rate, and the camera system trades specs and the Hasselblad look for something a bit more conventional. But looking at this in its entirety, the performance is just about the best that you can get, and for $8.99 or $9.99 USD, or $12 to $13.99 Canadian, there's a lot of innovation in here, and it is a great phone. If you guys have any opinions on whether any of these specs or details matter to you personally, or if there's anything you prefer on the OnePlus 15 over other models, or things that you feel like are missing, please drop a comment down below, but that's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this video or you found it useful, feel free to hit that like button. If you want to see more tech-related content or compare refresh rates with your blinking speed to find inner peace, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.